What does it really take to build a battery energy storage company fast without breaking quality, blowing margins, or losing control of the systems that make it scale possible? Welcome to Industry Ignited. I'm Dr. Leanne Aguilar, and today I'm joined by Mark Hagedorn, former CEO of US Best Corporation and now head of commercial operations for Verdi and US Best Corp. Mark is an operations, supply chain, and field service leader with deep expertise in quality and engineering, known for building gigafactories, scaling multi-site operations, and turning technical complexity into execution that delivers. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Leanne.
Now, you started in racing and vehicle engine development, then moved into heavy-duty trucking, advanced instrumentation, and eventually energy storage. What through line connects all those chapters, and what pulled you into clean energy in the first place?
So there's a couple pieces that are through lines there. So one is that when I even started with my bachelor's degree at the Western Washington University Vehicle Research Institute, there were batteries involved in a lot of the projects that we worked on that, were technology demonstration projects for folks like NHTSA, sort of thing. But, they were always either hybrid or natural gas, hybrid, or pure electric vehicles that we were working on. I mean, all the way back in, my freshman year was in '99, to give you some scale. So there was always the batteries involved. And then the other part of it is if you kind of look at what the end product that I was always working on at various companies, it's all considered capital equipment pretty much, right? So,
Right.
You think about the engines for a race car, a semi truck to trucking company, an electron microscope to somebody like Intel or Samsung. And then when you actually get to, battery energy storage at ESS or Core Power or US Best, those are all considered pieces of capital equipment to someone. So the business environment, the manufacturing process, all kind of winds up being adaptable through all of that, ultimately making batteries.
Yeah, making batteries, right. At the heart of it all. You've described your career as getting lucky while wandering around lost at the right moment. Looking back, what intentional choices actually created that luck? Skills you built, risks you took, or patterns you followed?
Big part of it was I just happened to be working with some of the best people in the given industry that I was in, and I got to learn a lot about how to do things and how not to do things along the way. When talk about, the clean energy business and, stationary batteries kind of being a newer thing, there are lots of aspects of them that you can take bits and pieces from other more established industries. I mean, you have the automotive industry that's been around for 140 years or so.
Yeah.
And they know how to make things. And so when you can translate some things from an industry like that to what we're doing with stationary BESS, tends to be a way to find out the best way to manufacture BESS systems. I mean, while BESS has some of its own nuances, being able to apply some of that experience that I've gained to the new thing, air quotes, is kind of one of those deals. Now, when I say, I got lucky wandering around lost, was the clean energy space is, a great example of, best laid plans don't necessarily always translate into massive positive results. I mean, if you look at ESS thing, at some point in time, they've run it, or at least maybe multiple times, have essentially run out of money, and then in which case operation slows down. But same thing happened with Core Power a little bit.
Yeah.
And and so when I was saying lost, those weren't necessarily planned choices. Always the point for opportunity. When that opportunity arose, I knew the right people and was at the right place in the right time with the right skill set to, basically go on to the next big thing. So
yeah,
that
right.
when I say that, that's sort of what I'm getting at.
So basically, like, you've been early in multiple companies, and it's a roller coaster industry, and technology's evolving. So what did those experiences teach you about the difference between great technology and a company that can survive at scale?
ESS is a great example of that, because I mean, if you would have talked to me in, the 2015, 2016 timeframe, I would have thought that, long duration energy storage was the right thing at the right time, and everybody was ready for it, and it was going to give you a traditional power generation experience when paired with renewables, and here we go. This was the big thing. And then, we look at where we're at now here in 2026, And now it's just now that the long duration energy storage stuff is really kind of getting traction and moving forward. And so it
Yeah.
felt like we were at the right time in the right place, and it was an amazing opportunity all the way back then. But with hindsight being where it is, we were actually quite early,
Hmm.
and so early for the industry, but also early for the technology and maturity of that as well.
Yeah. And I suppose that gives you an advantage, though, as well. I mean, being early to the game. And while it's maybe not time where it actually blossoms and, there's still a long road ahead, you're still gaining that insight and knowledge, and you're there for the evolution of the products.
Yeah, and if you've picked the right technology or right company to be with, all the stars align with the pivoting that needs to happen and the commercial success that needs to happen along the way. Maybe you'll eventually get there. However, sort of the common thing that happens in the clean energy industry is somebody has a great idea, gets it to a certain point, runs out of money,
Yeah.
and then that's sort of where it fizzles. A lot of the operations planning, budgeting, that's the thing that really backs up the fundraising to sort of keep that on track. And you kind of got to marry all of that stuff together.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's common in pretty much any innovative industry. It's like you run out of money at some point. So, right, it's keeping funding going, and it's finding new rounds of funding and to keep that innovation alive and
Yeah,
going.
and for an early technology company, before you actually put your product out in the field and manufacture onesies and twosies of it, you need to make sure the technology works, because
Mm,
that's sort of one of the big
yeah.
trap doors. Is you get your thing done, whatever you've decided the minimum viable product that's commercially viable is, you get it out there, and then it doesn't work, or you now have signed yourself up for this never ending circle of repair and modification and improvement and whatever, and
Yeah.
you spend a lot of money and time doing that, all the while you're not really advancing your reputation or kind of your reference project portfolio in the actually out in the market.
Right. Well, and not only that the technology works, but that you have buyers, that you have technology that's actually,
Oh,
commercially
yeah,
viable.
it has to solve your customer's problem, well, whatever
Exactly.
that is. If it's energy storage or power generation or whatever it is, it has to do what it says it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Now, you've repeatedly built operations functions from near zero, manufacturing, quality, supply chain, service, systems. What's the first operational foundation block you put down when you walk into a new build?
The first thing that we try to do is we try to seek to understand what's going on, right? So if this is an early technology company that's just getting ready to make its first commercial product, you need to understand the product. You need to understand where it comes from. You need to understand some of the nuances of it, and then you can kind of start planning your roadmap for scaling to whatever your scale is going to be. I mean, if we're talking about some of these things, we're maybe talking about 100 units a year, maybe. If we're talking about, cell gigafactory, you're potentially talking about millions of battery cells a year. And so you kind of need to understand what that is, and then focus on figuring out what that minimum commercially viable product is, and get it out there and do a good job with it. And then what flows along in that is with your ops guy, your CFO, and your engineering, you need to be working the financial model. Like it
Mm,
has to be a living model. It's your source of truth for where you're at now and where you're going to be, and you
right.
need to plan for real things, right? So it's not just the cost of a building, for example. It's the cost of making that building do what you want it to. Essentially, especially a young company, double your budget for that, more than you think it's going to be. And then again, continue to evolve that roadmap, right? Is that where you think you start with your minimum viable product now is on day one of trying to be commercially viable, might not be the thing that you ultimately wind up producing in volume, right? You either may
Mm,
make technical changes. The market may tell you that this thing needs to be bigger, needs to be smaller, whatever that is, and continue to plan for that, and blend that into whatever your research and development roadmap is too, right? So when are you going to have new products? What's going to be
right.
involved with them? Budget for that, because
Yeah.
new equipment, new facility, cha cha cha.
I mean, yeah, you make some really good points there. The road never ends up looking like you think it will, right? There's lots of twists and turns along the way. And so you need to like over budget, like you said, probably even double or triple what you expect it to be, because you don't know what's going to come up along the way. Things are going to take longer than expected. And so you have to have a good amount of agility as well. in order to pivot if you need to, if something doesn't work out, or if you learn something new, or if somebody else comes up with something similar, and then you have to, change up your technology
Or
to
something
differentiate.
geopolitical happens, and all of a sudden your
Yeah.
supply chain and the market changes, or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of ways to kind of get in a space that you haven't planned for. That's sort of the root of all of this, is that you want to have gamed out the many different things that could happen to you before they happen to you.
Right. Or a pandemic can hit.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So US Best was formed to address growing demand for domestic content and cybersecurity in the North America best market. What forces made that demand explode, and what are buyers really asking for beneath the buzzwords?
So you kind of have to look at that from two lenses, because as we kind of talked about, as US Best was just acquired in December by Verity, who was much larger, much more established company. We had significantly different product lines, and there are some features and benefits of both of those that address different aspects of the market. And so for US Best, for example, it's larger battery storage systems that are, the Honda Accord or, Toyota Camry of LFP stationary storage. Our largest building block is 5 MWh in a 20-foot container. It's Bloomberg Tier 1 UL listed product. It is not fiat compliant at the moment, although, potentially in the future it will be. However, it meets a price point with the large scale energy storage people, whether it be, utilities or large, commercial and industrial users. And for the people that are kind of in the time to power space, meaning that they need a solution now. It needs to meet their cost stack, and it has to work. It's not necessarily about incentives or tax credits or any of those things. Then that tends to make sense. Now, if you look at the Verity line, they're super safe batteries that are all made in the U.S., so that's a big deal. So 100% fiat compliant plus domestic content compliant. A little smaller building block, but because of the safety aspect of the batteries, they can actually be installed in buildings. And so one of Verity's claims to fame, and probably difficult to actually prove, they have the world's largest battery in a building in New York, in basically the basement of a multifamily apartment building. And it's being used for peak shaving, arbitrage, that sort of thing. But it can actually be in the building. It's that safe. Whereas you look at,
Wow.
the larger US Best systems, they got to be 150 feet away from a building, and it's just a little different product. Now, Verity does make some larger systems, but then those wind up being more attractive to the people that need the Build American, Buy American compliant systems. They need to absorb tax credits and incentives, those sort of things. And so those systems still make sense for those people. But when you start talking about, hey, I need to, put 105 MWh containers on a site somewhere, that's where US Best sort of kind of takes over there a little bit. And so as far as, what forces make the demand explode, so for Verity, it's the safe and USA made thing that, really makes them stand out, kind of on a thing on their own to a certain extent. When you start talking about who can actually make fiat compliant, domestic content compliant battery systems in North America, there aren't that many other people.
Yeah.
And then from the US Best standpoint, it well priced systems delivered by a US company and by a team of significant industry veterans. As far as again, the Honda Accord of energy storage system, it lands on your site, it works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's price competitive with everybody else. So
So
that's
they,
sort of what brings
yeah,
the demand for US Best.
two different value propositions. So it really depends on the values or what the
Yeah.
priorities of the
And when you
customers
think
are.
about like the energy storage or clean energy industry overall, right, is one solution isn't the only solution, right? Depending on what you're doing, whether it be a storage plus solar site being paired with wind, I mean, ultimately the batteries don't care where the electrons were generated, right? They could come from a nuclear plant. It could come from falling water. You could look at it from a distributed energy storage and generation sort of model. There's lots of different applications for the batteries for, different storage lengths, different chemistries, that sort of thing. And while lithium ion phosphate has kind of been one of the things that the industry settled on from a chemistry standard, that doesn't necessarily work for every single application that somebody's come up with, right? It's that, if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's trying to do a traditional power generation experience with, say, solar, long duration storage product may also be the thing that fits in there somewhere. and
Yeah.
that may be paired with some lithium ion as well. There's lots of ways to get to where we need to get to. Between Verity and US Best, we cover a big part of the catalog, as it were.
Yeah. So in your first year, you built corporate infrastructure, recruited teams, implemented systems, launched multi-state facilities, and deployed customer systems ahead of benchmarks. What were the 2 to 3 decisions that created momentum fastest?
So on the US Best side of things, one of the biggest things that created the momentum was working with a tech partner that already had the UL listed Bloomberg Tier 1 product, and that was in manufacturing that we were essentially going to be able to domesticate the assembly of. And so getting that an agreement arranged with that tech partner for the technology transfer and that sort of thing was a key deal, because there aren't very many shortcuts in doing this. Unfortunately, having done this a few times, I'd like to say that there's a couple of secrets that like all of a sudden unlocks all of this stuff, but ultimately it's some pretty basic stuff, which is get a product out in the field that you can point at that works at a creditable site as soon as
Hmm.
you can. And if you're not inventing the technology yourself, doing that with somebody that's credible and can speed things up is really a valuable thing. And then back to we were talking about getting the operation side of the house figured out sooner than later. Get your plans in place, get your roadmap in place, get all of that stuff done. That's another decision that you take on at the formation of the company as to when you're going to do that. And again, do that earlier, and then spend 80% of your time working in the business, 20% of your time working on the business. And so that's business systems, that's procedures, sort of thing. And that kind of prevents you from going too far into technical debt when you get down the road and are successful. And now all of a sudden have to really behaving like a professional manufacturing organization. You're not starting from scratch when the volume was already happening.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you've negotiated strategic agreements with cell partners shifting toward domestic gigafactories. What should leaders understand about the real constraints in best supply chains right now? Cells, controls, certification, integration, or something else?
Ooh, that's a fairly big topic. So there's probably a little history to be discussed here, in that if you transit back to the 2019 2020 timeframe and you were trying to be a stationary best manufacturer, everybody who was already making battery cells was making them for the EV industry for the most part,
Hmm.
and so you had a hard time securing the proper cells and basically putting your whole system together without them. And so back then, if you were doing that, you were sort of forced to come up with your own gigafactory for the cells. Now, with geopolitics changed and the industry having evolved with capacity and whatnot, it's a little easier to come up with cells, whether they be fiat compliant or not. There's some more options there.
Hmm.
And so, given that the real barrier for entry these days for a cell gigafactory is billions of dollars that you have to put together, the secret sauce behind them isn't as complicated as it used to be. And so now, being a company like we are, we have the point of evaluating: does it make sense for us to make our own cells right now, or are there fiat compliant cells available from another source that's highly reputable and everything, that we can enter into a long-term agreement with, that will
Right.
carry us 3 to 5 years into the future with cells that will work for us from a domestic content and fiat standpoint. And then we don't have to make that multi-billion-dollar capital investment in a cell factory now. I'm not saying we won't do that in the future, but you
Hmm.
might not have to do it now as part of your immediate operations roadmap, which
Right. Yeah.
that opens up some more possibilities for companies in this space. I mean, certainly time in the market and experience sort of win the race here a little bit, but you don't have to basically start from scratch with
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, I'm going to make best systems." Oh, and by the way, I got to have the second facility over here that's multi-billion dollars and 3,500 people making cells for me.
Yeah. So it makes more sense a lot of times just to partner instead of making that capital investment and
Yeah,
creating your
and
own.
you have to be careful with
Yeah.
the partner too, because those are definitely not all created equal. I mean, we
Mm.
have a fantastic one in a couple different areas of the business, but at the same time, you can wind up with someone who's disconnected and doesn't deliver on time and has
Yeah.
quality issues and all of those things, and then that really affects your product too. So, yeah, there's a partner beware aspect of some of that. And again, you can look
Yeah.
at the clean energy space and see all these like partnerships, between solar, battery, whatever, that just haven't worked out. You got to
Yeah.
watch out for
No, good tips there. Yeah, definitely watch out and make sure that you're partnering with a credible and reliable source because that will
that.
impact everything. Now, Mark, you led development of the first US designed and manufactured BESS controls. Why are controls so critical, not just for performance, but for trust, risks, and long term serviceability?
So battery controls are kind of an interesting thing in that below a certain level of the system, kind of meaning the top, like power system, energy management system control, they can be quite complicated. And so a lot of what's out in the market has been developed iteratively by multiple companies, a lot of them offshore. And with some of the things that we've seen with, there's a recent case where there were some rogue devices found in inverters or something like that. The cybersecurity aspect winds up being a big part of the conversation. And you start thinking about, who some of our customers are. Sometimes, certainly, we do have some defense projects. We also have some utility projects who, these days the utilities operate on nearly the same sort of security standards as the Defense Department does.
Oh, wow.
And then you also start looking at large CNI users that have operational security aspects to them as well, whether they be data centers, an Amazon warehouse, and something like that, where they can't have loss of control of their energy systems for a either foreign or just rogue actor. You have to start digging into, all right, where did the software code come from? What is in there? Who has control of it?
Yeah.
Who has access to the outputs from it? There's lots of ways to skin that cat, but the belt and suspenders approach is to have USA made software running on USA made hardware. So meaning that you've got chipsets coming from Texas, you got circuit boards being assembled and delivered to you at Idaho, and then you got software that's developed in New York, or Oregon for that matter.
Right.
That what if you have those things in place, you won't necessarily have to question hundreds of other ways that somebody could be doing something to you or your product somewhere in the future, right? It might not be an immediate thing. You got to remember, some of these best systems are made to live 25 years on a site somewhere. Could be something that is tucked away and used later. And if you don't have the full control over that, meaning you're buying the software from somebody else, or you're having the circuit boards made, somewhere overseas, you don't know. I mean, you can do a lot of testing, and there's some after the fact information security stuff.
Yeah.
The basis is all it is. Have USA made stuff, and have modern current stuff. I mean, that's the other thing, is that while you still have to do all the testing and due diligence on what you're licensing, you don't really have control over the engine room there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, good points. Now, you said operations is often undervalued in early stage companies, strategically and financially. If founders only fix one operations mistake early, what should it be?
It's usually under budgeting for the manufacturing ramp up process. And one of the things that, it's kind of an indicator that you've not done that correctly is, while you're in the manufacturing ramp up process, if engineering and operations is consistently coming to you and going, hey, I need to buy this $40,000 thing we didn't budget for over here. I got to get the electricians in here to do $20,000 worth of power drop work. I need a new transformer over here. All of a sudden, that stuff adds up real quick, and you start looking at, well, maybe I've got a shortfall between now and my next fundraising step. What am I going to do about that? Am I going to cut corners in what I'm doing here? Am I going to slow the process down? Like, all of those things kind of wind up being self-imposed barricades if you didn't budget correctly in the first place.
Yeah,
You know,
very
and
true.
and, and sometimes you're not going to know what some of those things are that you're going to budget for, but you do need to do the classic. Well, that needs to be 20% more because I don't know what I don't
Hmm.
know. I need to set something aside for that.
Yeah, so adding that cushion in there to make sure that you're covered for those incidentals or, yeah, unexpected extra costs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a believer in implementing ERP, MES, and operational systems earlier than most teams think they need. What's your Excel expiration date, the signal that the company is accumulating dangerous operational debt?
That's a great question. The real crude measure that I use for that is, and again, I've been part of some companies that kept after the Excel do it ourselves thing way too long. was once coming up with your manufacturing metrics and data and maintenance of said things becomes a full-time job for someone, you waited too long to put business systems in place to help with that. It may still
Mm,
wind up being a full-time job for them, but then that position you're in is actually scalable. Whereas if you continue with the Excel sheets, you're just going to have to add more and more people working on Excel sheets. That it sort of becomes a self-licking ice cream cone somewhere in there. So having the manufacturing execution systems, having the ERP systems, forces you to also set up processes and procedures, figure out what your supply chain is, and get that off another Excel sheet somewhere, and also allows you to start doing one of my favorite things is future planning and budget forecasting.
hmm.
Plus, you're also then able to get better views of what you're actually producing. You're actually able to manage your quality information that you build into the manufacturing process and the supply chain. You can start tracking all of that. If it's in Excel sheets, you wind up with a couple like key people that know where everything is.
Mm,
And if somebody all of a sudden runs in the front door and says, "Hey, I got a purchase order for 100 of whatever we make," all of a sudden somebody's going to go, oh my, let me go get my Excel sheets out and see what we can
right.
do with that. Whereas if you have the systems that you already have kind of the dashboard or the overview of what's possible.
Yeah, so there's that inefficiency. So basically, rule of thumb, when one person is spending their entire, 40 hours a week managing and running these Excel sheets, it's probably time to put a system into place that takes that
Yeah.
over. And yeah,
And it's a crawl, walk, run thing, right? You
mm,
can get pretty far on QuickBooks, especially if you're baking cookies as opposed to making complex battery systems.
sure.
But there's a point at which you need to go to an actual real frontline ERP system. And then assuming if your manufacturing process has some automation or some complex routing, workflow, kitting for, say the systems integration, or so the batteries in a container part of the show, that winds up being pretty hard to track. And that's where
Yeah.
the manufacturing execution system comes in. And you wind up with kind of efficiencies across the organization once you actually get that implemented. Now, the other side of it is there's more capital cost, and you actually have to dedicate some of your people to working on the business for implementation and that sort of thing. But
Hmm.
that's an investment that's easier to make earlier on than when all of a sudden you're 1,000 people and have
Definitely.
who knows how
Yeah.
many $1 million of capital deployed towards your operation, and you're
Right.
still trying to scrape it together with Excel sheets. Tough.
No, absolutely. There's a lot of inefficiency and risk is introduced at, if that's the case. So I agree. The sooner you can get a system into place, the better. So then you have those standard processes and procedures. There's that consistency across the board and it's available to more people. And yeah, so a lot of benefits for that.
It also helps to remove single points of failure in the manufacturing
Hmm.
process, right? I mean, if you have the one ops leader guy that wins the lottery and does, you got 2 weeks and then he's essentially
Right.
retired.
Yeah.
If you don't have that stuff built into systems and you're still working on tribal knowledge and that sort of thing, that can be a very destabilizing event that can happen. Whereas if
Right.
you have the process procedures and the systems in place, certainly big loss, but not wheels falling off.
No, no, right. Somebody else can pick up where they left off and you have
Yeah.
all the data and it's easy to track and understand and get back on top of. Now, when you're scaling quality and standards across multi-site facilities, what are the non-negotiables that keep you from drifting? Process discipline, supplier qualification, testing validation, training, culture, or all of it?
Well, it all starts out with the culture and the employee engagement, right? So especially in a young small company, you want to have everybody know what the mission is, what the important parts of the aspects of what we're doing are to the customer, to the manufacturing, and to the actual technology that you're working with. And once you have that engagement and kind of understanding with the contributing population to quality, which ultimately winds up being the whole company in some aspect or another, so very like sales, everyone's involved in quality in the company as well, even if it's messaging or controlling documents that are to customers, all the way down through manufacturing, all of that stuff. All of that leads to what your out of box quality, perception and score actually winds up being. And so with the culture in place, it winds up being much easier to implement quality procedures, testing procedures, because everybody is engaged in making that quality product. Ideally, they care about it, and they're willing to expand and adjust what they're doing to meet the next level of quality that's required as you move down your roadmap to commercialization.
Hmm. Right. So it's really hiring the right people, bringing the right people on board that align with your company
Yeah,
values to
yeah,
create that culture.
and being transparent with them, right? Because I mean, if you're in a younger company, often there's a lot of uncertainty as to when is the next order coming in, and are we going to be in business 6 months from now, and
Yeah.
all of that stuff, all of that young company stuff, and being able to kind of at least be on the same general page with your employee population is especially like on a quarterly basis, you have all hands meetings and all of that. And while you might not talk about the nitty gritty of the fundraising, you might talk about here's the orders, here's how we delivered on them, here's the new orders that are coming in, here's kind of the timeline for that. If there's a new product change or anything that we're talking about, that gets included in that conversation. If all of a sudden our automation line is going to come online, you're able to kind of give a little bit of overview and preview of what that's going to look like and how that's going to change, and ultimately that results in a higher quality of work, and again better engagement upstream and downstream of each employee's job.
Yeah. So with that level of transparency, how do you manage and mitigate flight risk of employees and keep them motivated and not, in fear that their position might go away?
The hope and confidence in the organization needs to remain there, and then that's where being transparent, where we're saying what we're trying to do, how we're actually doing, and where we're going to go from there. Like that winds up being a thing that engages and retains employees. It makes you feel like you know what's going on at work, but you know what to expect. It's not a CFO showing up once a year saying everything's fine, or gee, we're short some money this year, and then just kind of moving on. I think is a kind of a tenet of some of the clean energy industry, is there a lot of that uncertainty and churn that happens, whether it just be geopolitical stuff in the news or whatever. That can make me think about the blue collar manufacturing guy. That might make him nervous if he doesn't know really what's going on
Right.
in the context of his company, the job, and the product, and that sort of thing. And so being able to talk about that with your employees at a level that is appropriate and they understand, winds up being a really really powerful thing. And then when you start talking about, oh gee, we need to do continuous improvement projects or something like that, you'll have more people on board willing to
Hmm.
pitch in and look at issues, not assign blame or anything like that, but
Yeah.
actually work to resolve things that are meaningful to the company.
Yeah. Got it. Now you've managed greenfield and brownfield automation, improved profit margins, and scaled operations in volatile markets. What's your playbook for maintaining margin while quality expectations increase and timelines compress?
Well, the first part of that is you got to know your numbers, right? So you really got to know what stuff's costing you right now, because I mean ultimately the quality part, there's a cost to that, right? Is that
Yeah.
you can make something super cheap, but if it doesn't work, then you either can't sell it or you're fixing it for 25 years. Finding where your sweet spot for that is a big deal. Again, also being honest with yourself about what your minimum commercially viable product actually is, and when it is time to go through various stages of manufacturing, because a lot of the companies you think of as from a startup standpoint may go on a bit of a journey there, starting from like a small business accelerator sort of program to their first like commercial building that's probably more of like a flex space or something like that, where maybe they make product number one. But then when that's successful, then you start talking about, oh gee, I got to make hundreds of these things. Now that's another facility, and that may be one that isn't something that already exists that I can move in and repurpose. Maybe I've got to build that one from scratch.
Yeah.
And so kind of having that honest look at those things and being able to model along a roadmap, that's sort of the secret sauce to all of that. Because I've certainly been involved in organizations where we didn't understand our margins very well, and so we went out and sold a bunch of things, but then wound up barely making reasonable revenue at net
Oh,
at the end of all of that. and
wow.
and so then that also winds up being a hurdle for you to scale up even more, because you can't apply revenue back to the business if you didn't make that
Yeah.
much of it in the first place.
So know your margins.
And the same thing
Exactly.
manufacturing operations side of things, right?
Yeah.
Is if all of a sudden you move to commercial operations and you find out that there's 48 hours of labor in each one of your battery modules and there's 50 of those in each system, all of a sudden your actual cost versus what, was being modeled for, the bill of materials items and everything else winds up exploding. And then you got to figure out what to do with that. And so that also can kind of wind up being a fairly large roadblock for somebody who's trying to scale their manufacturing at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So you called 2026, 2027 huge growth years. What's the next operational milestone you're building toward?
So, I mean, for us, it's a little bit of a scale with discipline type scenario, right? So we want to very very significantly expand our manufacturing capability and volume for the products that we have, but we don't want to do that by hemorrhaging money left and right, and basically being able to meet the market required volume that we have, and then be able to build upon that to grow year over year. Right now for us, that's a lot of effort on the customer care and sales side of things, but then it's also us spending some of our time working on the business. So whether it be improving our automated battery manufacturing lines, whether it be improving how we do the systems integration, so again the batteries in a container thing, those are going to be key to essentially match the big sales that we're going to experience here.
Yeah. And you've worked in organizations where external events reshaped everything, like IRA-driven acceleration, acquisition shifts. How do you build an operating model that can absorb shocks without derailing execution?
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up. Is in the clean energy industry, I guess it's kind of a tongue in cheek thing, but we sort of refer to ourselves as a solar coaster, and then and that goes back even before the 2009 time frame. What that's really talking about is there's boom years and there's bust years, for all that stuff, and a lot of it is driven by geopolitical things, which you can kind of throw the IRA and OBBB things into that. So, from the battery industry, we went from not having much outside of some foreign EV capability and whatnot in the US for actual, battery and cell manufacturing, to now incentivizing anybody that had anything viable to come and set up manufacturing in the US. And that happened with solar as well. And then once we got some of those things started, then all of a sudden the rules changed a little bit. So now you couldn't have foreign entities of concerns involved and still get tax credit. You had domestic content requirements that you didn't have before, and so depending on how your company was set up, you may have some work to do to either be able to have your product maintain eligibility for tax credits, or rearrange your business to address the non-fiat compliant part of the market. And that also kind of involved a capital market shift. So not only was it the product that you were selling and what incentives you could get, how easy was it to get your private equity capital to enable you to do all the things and scale up and do all that thing. So the question then winds up being not just how do you build a company and how do you build manufacturing, how do you build something resilient and compliant and flexible enough that when you guaranteed the next thing's going to happen, whatever that winds up being, that you're still able to be relevant. And so right now what a lot of that's been is domesticate, do it yourself, do it on this continent, and do it with proven technology. That's another personality in this industry I steal the term from. You're not making a magic box, meaning it's not proven out and who knows what's inside it and how it works, So if you built a business with a foundation like that, you're actually going to be able to deal better with some of that stuff than if you have a business with a foundation that's heavily tied to an offshore something or other. It's heavily tied to a supply chain that isn't necessarily from here, or subject to a bunch of tax, tariffs, forced labor, anti-circumvent dump, plus a few other things. If you don't have those stones in your foundation, you've got a pretty good shot at weathering whatever comes down the pipe as far as new geopolitical risk and just the industry risk in general.
Yeah, right. Good point. Now, outside of energy storage, you run a sports fishing charter business. So you clearly understand risks, preparation, and conditions you can't control. What leadership lessons from the water shows up most in how you run operations?
We kind of touched on this a little bit before, but it's sort of, basically having a game plan for potential outcomes. And so when we start talking about the fishing thing, so we're primarily known as an albacore tuna charter, which means that we're charging 50 miles offshore one way every trip to go find the fish. And that's on the open Pacific Ocean, where Mother Nature doesn't really care what your plan is. And she's executing hers, right? And so 50 miles offshore, it takes a couple hours to run out that far. Weather, ocean conditions can change a lot, and if you get stuck out there 50 miles offshore, and the weather goes bad on you, if you've never ever thought of that before and what you're going to do, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with manufacturing batteries is, if the OBBB regulation changes with regard to, again, the domestic content and fiat concerns, like if right now is the first time that you've ever thought of needing to figure out how that affects you and what you should do about it, you're about a year too late, and you're going to have a bad time. And one of the other things is the customer service aspect. Ultimately, 50% of what your charter customer walks away with or the experience they had with you. Some of it has to do with the boat and how the fishing was or whatever, but whether they had a good time or not really has to do with how well you took care of them and transfer knowledge and responded to their vibe, right? And it's the same thing on the battery side of things too. Is that we have varying kinds of customers with varying levels of experience and technical expertise and all of that. And, it's our job not only to, make a good working product, but also to make sure that it's the right product for you, it solves your problem, and that if anything ever goes wrong with it, you're taken care of by people that are in a relevant time zone that speak your language and are, actually, set up and knowledgeable to like work with the product. Because again, in both industries, whether it be offshore fishing or the manufacturing and selling of batteries, a lot of the decision making really comes down to, I don't like that guy. And I mean, it really does. And if you don't take care of the customer and make sure that they have an amazing experience all the way through sale and after sale, you're probably not going to get that customer to come back again. But two, also that customer is probably going to tell everybody about what their experience is going to be. And so you got to be as close to airtight there as you can be.
Right. Great insight. And it's not just about the products, it's about the people, it's about their experience, taking care of them, because at the end of the day, you might have a great product, but if you don't do good business, if you don't treat your customers well, they're not going to want to come back because they don't feel respected and they don't like you. Yeah, that's true.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you for joining me. It's been a great conversation and a true masterclass in what it really takes to scale energy storage with discipline. Where can listeners learn more about you and US Best Corp?
If you're interested in Viridi and US Best Corp, both have amazing websites, which is kind of what we try to drive everybody to. And so that's viridiferente.com and usbestcorp.com. Another way to kind of stay a little bit more live in touch with all the things going on at both companies and the people is, to make sure you follow both companies on LinkedIn, friend me on LinkedIn. A few of our other principals like Alcoran, who's our head of development, we're out in the industry space, either at events or at customer sites. And if you already do follow me on LinkedIn, I try to at least do something insightful or entertaining, at least about once a week. Although I think one of the more famous things, and maybe not embarrassing, but sort of interesting, is that I've had this long-running series of posts that basically titled "Where in the World is Mark Hagedorn?" As in previous roles, I traveled a lot, and anyway, customer sites or it was gigafactory things, that sort of thing. And so if you look at my LinkedIn metrics, my "Where in the World is Mark Hagedorn" posts get way more impressions than even some of the really, really cool articles that I've written.
All right. Well, to our listeners, check out Mark's LinkedIn so you can find out where in the world he's at and follow along. Thank you again, Mark. And to everyone listening, subscribe and follow Industry Ignited and tune in to our next episode. Until then, stay bold, stay curious, and keep igniting industry.